Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study of the prophet Amos, and we're in that section of the 5 visions that he has of judgment. And the first three of these, and each one of these visions, the first four anyway, begin with the phrase, "Thus the Lord God showed me, and behold, I saw it, and I'm showing it to you." And the first three are about God's judgment. We had the locust plague coming at the spring harvest, and the prophet crying out, "Please, don't do this." They can't take it, and God relenting. And the second was fire consuming the water and then the farmland. And the prophet crying out, "Please, don't do this." And God relented. But this third one, which is connected, this is God now showing him, listen, this situation cannot be fixed, is the image of the plumb line. I've heard so many sermons about the plumb line that had very little to do, if nothing at all, perhaps even nothing at all to do with the context of the prophet Amos. It's just such a wonderful image. We're going to take a little time today to talk about the plumb line in verses 7 through 9 and put it in its clear context here in the prophet Amos. And this is such a powerful image. Let's not forget that he's saying these things publicly, because in verse 10, he gets confronted and accused of treason and told to go home, because he's not just writing this down in a dark room with a single oil lamp or something. He's in the streets proclaiming these things. And we've seen how powerful his language is. It would have been something like hearing John the Baptist, 700 years later. It would have been electric what he was doing, and so it gets opposition. But let's listen to the plumb line, verses 7 through 9 of chapter 7. Thus he showed me, and behold, the Lord was standing by a vertical wall with a plumb line in his hand. The Lord said to me, "What do you see, Amos?" And I said, "A plumb line." And the Lord said, "Behold, I'm about to put a plumb line in the midst of my people Israel. I will spare them no longer. The high places of Isaac will be desolate, and the sanctuaries of Israel laid waste, and I shall rise up against the house of Jeroboam with the sword." This is Jeroboam the second, the current king, actually. You can't be more clear than this. I'm going to rise up against the house of Jeroboam, against this nation with the sword. I'm going to bring military invasion. I'm going to cut this nation down. That's what Yahweh is saying. Now let's remember, this is important because they're still worshiping Yahweh along with other gods. They're worshiping the bull cult. They're worshiping the Saturn cult. But those have already been mentioned specifically, and they will be mentioned again. But it's not like Yahweh doesn't matter. He does matter to them. And so this word of judgment is going to shake them up, not to the point that they're going to change, but it's going to be disturbing to them. When times are good, people don't want to hear that next week is going to bring, destruction. And that's what the prophet Amos is doing. The plumb line. There's so much we don't know about ancient architecture and engineering. We really don't fully know how the pyramids were built, or how the ziggurats of Babylon were constructed, how the Aztecs or the Mayans or the Incans were able to do what they could do because none of them had a wheel, and they built these structures without even the use of a simple tool like a wheel. But we do know what the plumb line is for. When a wall was erected, if you stood on the top of the wall and you held a plumb line, you could tell whether or not the wall was straight up and down or leaning one way or the other. And if it was leaning even a fraction, it had to be torn down. It had to be torn down and replaced because it wasn't going to stand very long. When the building settled, it was going to collapse. If a slightest earthquake came, it's going to collapse. A strong wind would make it collapse. The plumb line is measuring something, and if it doesn't meet standard, you can't salvage it. You have to tear it down and build something else. And that's what God has done. He's showing the prophet, look, huh, this can't be fixed. You've asked me to relent twice. I've relented twice, but I need you to see now, this cannot be fixed. This is going to happen. I'm going to send an army and they're going to tear all this down because it cannot be fixed. And it is that message that was immediately responded to by Amaziah the priest. And we'll talk about that next time. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.